Good morning to my dear students. Students, as in our previous video, we were discussing about pollination. And in my yesterday's video, I discussed the topic cell pollination. In the same series, today we are going to discuss about cross pollination. Cross pollination is also called as either xenogamy or allogamy. So students, as you are well aware that what is the meaning of cross pollination? Actually, cross pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to the stigma of genetically different flower. And I want to add one more thing. Ki in case of the cross pollination, the pollen grains are going to release from one flower of one plant and they are landing over the another flower of another plant. Means there are two different plants and they are genetically different but having same species, and the pollen is going to release from the first one plant and the its or the pollen is landing over the stigma over the another flower of another plant. And cross pollination required some special pollinating agencies. Now, what are these external agencies? I am going to show you in my next slide. Here in the picture, you can see that there are two types of agencies are required for the cross pollination process. First ones are abiotic agencies and the second one are called as biotic agencies. So in abiotic agencies, basically there are two major agencies are there. The first one is wind, and while the pollination is through wind, then it is called as anemophily. Instead of it, if the water is the pollinating agent, then such kind of pollination is called as hydrophily. On the other hand, while the biotic agencies or biotic factors or living things are responsible for the pollination process, then it is called as animal or zoophily. And there are various types or various animals which are helping in the process of pollination process. I have few of the examples. Suppose insects are pollinating agencies, then it is called as entomophily. If birds are pollinating agencies, then it is called as ornithophily. If bats are pollinating agencies, then it is called as chiropetrophily. If snails are pollinating agencies, then it is called as melecophily. If ants are pollinating agencies, then it is called as myrmecophily. And the last one, while the snakes are responsible for pollination process, then it is called as ophiophily. So very few of them we are going to discuss in detail. ठीक है, the for initial we are going to discuss about the wind pollination or anemophily. Since you know very well that ki in case of the wind pollination, the wind is the major pollinating agencies. So I have to say that ki it is a mode of cross pollination or transfer of pollen grains where the main pollinating agency is wind. And I have some examples of plants which show anemophily. Coconut palm is the first one example, date palm is the another example, maize is the third one example, many of the grasses and cannabis sativa. ठीक है, these are the some examples of anemophily, or I have to say that wind pollination. So while a plant is performing wind pollination or undergoing wind pollination, so it must have some adaptations for wind pollination. So what are these adaptations? We are going to discuss them in detail. The first one characteristic which will be present in the wind pollinated flower is the flowers are colorless. देखो wind से pollination हो रहा तो there is no need of pollen, no need of color, no need of odor or scent. ठीक है, odorless plants will be there and nectarless because they have not to produce nectar for the reward for the insect as well as the bird, so they will not produce nectar, they will not produce odor, or they will not produce any kind of color. ठीक है, second, the pollen grains are very light, small, winged or dusty, dry, smooth, non-sticky and unwettable. So means since the pollen grains has to be fly in the air, so these are very light in weight, they are small sized, and they are winged because they have to fly, so that's why they are winged. Or sometimes they are dusty, they are dry and smooth, non-sticky, or they are basically non-sticky or dry, or unwettable means the water cannot destroy them. ठीक है, the next feature is the stigma is hairy, feathery or branch to catch the wind borne पॉलन ग्रेन्स. तो इसका जो स्टिग्मा होगा बहुत फैदरी होगा. क्यों? क्योंकि इसे कैच करना है, जो आपके विंड के साथ उड़ते हुए आपके पॉलन ग्रेन्स आ रहे हैं, इट हैज़ टू बी कैच इट. सो इट विल बी फैदरी और इट विल बी ब्रांच्ड, इट विल बी हेरी. And the last one is the pollen grains are produced in very large number because the probability of landing on the stigma is very less. So the wind pollinated flowers are producing a large number of pollen grains. Here this is the example of the maize plant. You can observe easily that at the topmost male flowers are there. They are producing a large number of pollen grains. And most probably you have seen it कि ये बहुत lighted whitish color के होते हैं, बहुत हल्के होते हैं, and they fly or they can fly in the air very easily. And the lower one region you can see that कि बचपन में आप खेला भी करते होंगे जो मेज के ऊपर जहाँ पर आपके कॉर्न के दाने लगते हैं उसके ऊपर सम मॉस्टिसेस और मूंछों लाइक स्ट्रक्चर जो होता है, this is called the female flower. And the stigma and it's the fine hair like structures are stigma, and when the pollen flies in the air, it lands over the stigma very easily, it catches it, and the pollination process completes. So this is the example of the anemophily. Now I want to discuss the another one. These are the some examples of the pollen grains. And the next one is hydrophily. Actually, hydrophily is a mode of pollination in which the pollen grains are transferred through water. ठीक है, and examples are Zostera or Vallisneria. ठीक है, so what are the adaptations? I am telling you that कि the flowers which are undergoing water pollination, the flowers are very small, inconspicuous, and they are nectarless, they are odorless, the pollen grains are very light in weight, they are also unwettable. Okay, because these pollen grains are going to be released in the water, so they have a special coating over them. ठीक है, and this coating is called as mucilaginous coating, and which prevents it from the water. And stigma are quite long. ठीक है, स्टिकी बट अनवेटेबल, स्टिग्मा बड़े साइज के होते हैं, स्टिकी होते हैं बट अनवेटेबल होते हैं. नाउ हेयर इन द पिक्चर यू कैन सी दैट कि वन फ्लावर इज स्टैमिनेट फ्लावर एंड द अनदर फ्लावर इज पिस्टिलेट फ्लावर. ठीक है, मीन्स वन फ्लावर इज हैविंग stamens and one flower is having pistils. And there are two different types of hydrophily is there. In the picture you can see that epihydrophily and hypohydrophily. You can easily observe that कि in epihydrophily the stigma are at the surface of the water, where they can easily catch the pollen grains. Or in the next one, hypohydrophily, you can see that कि they are submerged inside the water, and while the pollens are floating under the water surface, they can easily catch it. ठीक है, now the next one is pollination is entomophily. Okay, entomophily means where the pollinating agencies are insects. ठीक है, so the pollination in which the main pollinating agencies are insects, then such kind of pollination is called as entomophily. And the insects which are helping in the process of pollination process are moths, butterflies, wasps, bees, beetle, etc, etc. And they have some also adaptations for entomophily. And what are these adaptations? They are showy or brightly colored, means they are bright colored so that they can attract insects towards them. And most insects pollinated flowers have landing platform, so because insect has to sit there, so that's why they have landing platform. And the pollen grains are spiny, quite heavier in weight. They are surrounded by yellow sticky oily substance called pollen kit. So because the pollen has to attach in the body of the insect, so the pollen grains are quite sticky, or they have a yellowish or oily coating over the surface. And the stigmas are also most sticky, so that the pollen can easily stick over it. And some flowers provide safe place to insect for laying eggs. Sometimes the flowers are giving reward as a product of pollination process. They are giving some surface to insects or pollinators for laying their eggs. And sometimes there are some flowers which are pollinated by beetles or flies. They have some bad odor, that's why the insects can attract toward them. And sometimes as a reward, the flowers which are insect pollinated, they are providing nectar, ठीक है, as a food source to insects. And the last one I want to discuss, ornithophily. Ornithophily is a kind of pollination in which the main pollinating agencies are birds. ठीक है, and so that they have some adaptations for the birds. These ornithophily the flowers which are undergoing ornithophily are brightly colored, and basically they have red, orange, or yellow or blue color. and the floral appendages or the floral parts are quite leathery in appearance, and they secrete or they produce a large amount of the nectar as a reward for the birds. Okay, and the scent is basically absent in them. Okay, now the plants which are undergoing cross pollination, they have some adaptations for only cross pollination. Now what are these adaptations? Ki they can prevent cell pollination. What are the, or in another words I have to say that ki what are the adaptations which flowers or the plants are showing for cross pollination instead of cell pollination? So the first adaptation is dichogamy. Dichogamy means anther and stigma are going to mature at different times. Means suppose there is a bisexual flower and it has both male as well as the female reproductive organs. So for preventing cell pollination they have adapted as dichogamy. In dichogamy what is going on, anther और स्टिग्मा are developing at different time और maturing at different time. यानी एंथर या तो पहले मैच्योर हो जाएगा और स्टिग्मा अभी ग्रोइंग कंडीशन में होगा, या दूसरी कंडीशन है कि स्टिग्मा पहले मैच्योर हो जाएगा और जो एंथर है वो अभी फुल्ली मैच्योर नहीं हुआ है तो पॉलन प्रोड्यूस नहीं करेगा. तो द फर्स्ट कंडीशन इज कॉल्ड एज प्रोटेंट्री. इन प्रोटेंट्री व्हाट हैपेंस, एंथर मैच्योर्स अर्लियर देन द स्टिग्मा ऑफ द सेम फ्लावर. ठीक है, फॉर एग्जांपल सनफ्लावर और साल्विया. द सेकंड कंडीशन इज कॉल्ड एज प्रोटोगेमी. ओके, प्रोटोगाइनी में क्या होता है कि द स्टिग्मा मैच्योर्स अर्लियर देन द एंथर, सो दैट कि द स्टिग्मा रिसीव्स pollen from another flower or another plant before maturing the male reproductive organ. Mirabilis jalapa 4 o'clock plant as well as glorisa and as well as the plantago are some examples of protogamy. The another kind of adaptation is harcogamy. Okay, what is harcogamy? I want to tell you that ki in harcogamy the plants have the plants which are having bisexual flowers. ठीक है, in such flowers the position, I have to say that ki the position of anther as well as or the position of stamen as well as the stigma is quite different. Means the stigma is quite higher in position in comparison of anther, and the suppose the pollens are going to release, they can't be reached in the stigma of the same flower. So this is called harcogamy. And the last one is called as self incompatibility. Means they are genetically well adapted. Means the stigma, if the pollen of the same flower is landing over the stigma of the same flower, so the stigma is not going to recognize that particular pollen and the pollen germination will not occur. So in this way the same flower's stigma is not accepting the pollen of the same flower. So this is called self incompatibility, and through which they are preventing themselves from the self pollination process. Finally, I am going to discuss about the advantages as well as the disadvantages of cross pollination. Initially I am talking about the advantages. Cross pollination introduces genetical recombination and hence variation in the progeny. Since we know that the gametes are coming from two different plants, so definitely they will cause variation, and variation causes evolution. ठीक है, and the second point is, it is mentioned here, cross pollination increases the adaptability in the offspring toward the changes in the environment. If the variations are coming, then definitely the plants is changing regularly and it can adapt itself for the changing environmental conditions. Third one, it makes the organism better fitted in the struggle of the existence. So all the points are common, I think. If the adaptation is coming, so definitely if the environmental conditions are changing, so it can be very easier for the plant to exist itself in the changing environmental condition, and it makes it fit for the struggling conditions. Okay, and the last one, the plants produced through cross pollination is more resistance to disease. So definitely in our previous video we discussed that ki cell pollination causing in breeding depression, which also leads to the intolerance of the diseases. So while in on the other hands we can say that ki in case of cross pollination the resistance against the disease increases generation after generation. While there are some advantages, along with it some disadvantages are also. The first disadvantage is a factor of chance is always involved in cross pollination. Means it depends on the by chance process. Means there are some probabilities of landing a pollen on the stigma, and there are some probabilities that the pollens will not land over the stigma. So by it's a by chance process, it's less economical. some undesirable characters can also be introduced by the upcoming pollen. ठीक है, and the last one, very good characters of the race are likely to be spoiled. तो ज़रूरी नहीं कि हमेशा सारे कैरेक्टर मेंटेन ही रहेंगे, कुछ अनडिजायरेबल कैरेक्टर भी आ सकते हैं एंड कुछ डिजायरेबल कैरेक्टर पास ऑन नहीं भी हो सकते हैं. सो दीज आर सम डिसएडवांटेजेस. सो इन दिस वे वी आर completing our pollination process. Once again, I will meet you in my next video with a new topic. Thank you. Bye bye and have a nice day.